All right, welcome everyone to another edition of the Subseasonal Forecast Contest. Today is October 16th. And to start with here, we're going to do our typical thing. We're going to look back at the attribution. We also want to welcome our industry guest today, Jason Lynn. Jason Lynn is a longtime industry participant here. We're going to give Jason a wide berth here in just a little bit to talk about his background and also to walk us through a little bit of his forecast process. All right, before we get into all that, like I mentioned, we'll start with the attribution. And this forecast actually, I was going to say has the distinction of being the last of the CDDs, but it's not. It's the second to last of the CDDs. Looking at the screen right now, you're looking at the forecasts that were made from September 22nd and verifying for the October 7th to October 11th period. So again, we were still forecasting CDDs. We're forecasting CDDs basically for any forecasts made in September. So that's why these values look kind of small. So I'll sort this by CRPS. That's our performance metric here. And you can see, I think, most of the forecast here. The forecast board's getting a little bit big because we've got some new participants from the University of Missouri. But just to give you the verification, which is at the bottom, the verification for this period was 19.6 CDDs. And just to give some perspective on that, the 10-year is up here. That was 15.4. And the 30 years, 12.2. So this was a forecast that was certainly warmer than normal. We'll take a look at the map here in a second. But I just want to point out some of the forecasts that did quite well here. One of our Missouri teams, actually, Missouri, they've got their own names here. MU team number 1 actually was the best performer here. So kudos to our new participants here. I don't know how I should feel about that since I've only been forecasting for 20 years and I'm not near the top. But anyway, and then we had a number of good forecasts, though, in general here. Not only from the University of Missouri teams, Paul Roundy did quite well. Matt Johnson, one of the research meteorologists, did quite well here. In general, a lot of the forecasts were better than climatology, the 30-year. Looking near at the bottom here, we had a couple that struggled. The CFS, as per usual, did not perform well. And surprisingly, industry number 1, that's our Maxar, they've done really well this year. So. But this was a tough one for them. It looks like they were at the cooler end of things. And just a reminder, we have some of these persistence forecasts, and they typically are not very good, especially with any kind of, when you're in volatile patterns, because they tend to be persistent, as the name implies. Let's just take a quick look. I'm going to pull up the map here, and then I'll open it up, and we can talk about those. Let me pull up the, sorry, I thought I had this up, but I'll pull it up real quick. We're going to go to the Dynacast page that Maxar provides us, just so that we can see that period. And actually, while that's coming up, or actually, here it is. Okay. So what I say, October 7th to 11th is our verification. And let's just look at how this period verified. Like I said, I think it was, it should be pretty warm. Yep. And there it is. So, basically blanket warmth across much of the country, coast to coast, with just a few exceptions, Jay Peak, Vermont, and what is that? I don't know, Northern California. I was trying to think of the town. But basically warmth across much of the area here. And I want to show one more thing. Let's just pull up the, I believe this is the correct one. Yeah, I pulled up the, this is the Maxar 16 to 20 day report verifying for this period, so October 7th to October 11th. And you can see some of the issues here, not just with the Maxar forecast. Both the Maxar and the EC and CFS really didn't capture the warmth that enveloped most of the central and eastern parts of the country. So that there was some issues there. One other thing we could do, I forgot about this, but now we have, I don't think Jason saw this last time, but we did add this. I think it should be here. We can now look at what the maps were showing. So I've got too much stuff here. Where's the EC? There's the CFS. Let's pull up the CFS first. We can now look at the maps from these. So this was
Yeah, so
yeah, this is the map from the CFS for that period. And if I can find the EC, where's the EC? I'm going blind here. There it is. Okay, we'll pull up the EC, and there's the EC. It's interesting that the EC from a 500 pattern doesn't look that bad, but again, when we look at it from the 2 meter, it didn't quite capture the warmth in these. So let me just open it up now. Does anyone on the line here have any thoughts in terms of this forecast period? Anyone want to add anything to what we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think I'm the only one here with you guys. So when I was doing this forecast, I was the 30-year average for it had most of the country at 65 or lower. So I was really only forecasting. I put a pretty low number for this. So because I was only really forecasting for like the lower third of the country, basically Florida to California. And then I split that kind of in half when I did my forecast. But did we experience some like HDDs in the northern territories, like the northern states? Or yeah.
What was the question? I'm sorry, did we see CDDs?
Yeah, can you go to the distribution of
HDD.
actual temperature, not the deviation from the average?
Oh, the actual
Normal?
temperatures. Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. Average temperature. Let's pull that up. All right, there's your average temperature. So it looks like this is northern Minnesota. This is the 50-degree line. This
Yeah.
yellow orange, and then this is it's 10-degree increments. So southern Minnesota is the 60-degree. So if you're looking at CDDs, anything greater than 65, right? So kind of like, kind of this area.
Okay.
aren't there actually in the parameter lists from CDDs and HDDs, both
Oh, that's a good point.
anomalous?
Yeah, let's see. I think you're right. All right. So yeah, if there's cooling degree days, so let's pull that. Yeah, there we go. It's a good idea.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, generally the first it's like October about 4th to October 14th is the transition between meaningful CDD dominance and meaningful HDD dominance. So this is the pivot period.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a good point to bring up, Sean, that it's not just about, hey, it was above normal in international falls. Who cares, right? Because it takes a lot to make a difference in terms of CDDs. It's really down where Jason lives, Texas, and then over to the southeast.
Yeah, you typically need some deep oranges or reds in the south or purples in the north to enhance demand
Right.
nationally.
Yeah, I assumed very close to this pattern, and like zero CDDs for most of the country. Really just had like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Florida, and the Gulf states getting some HDDs or CDDs.
And then there's a pretty substantial human behavior component for that transition week too. So if your first cool event is not strong, it will badly underperform the related gas and power demand numbers relative to the temperature anomalies and even the weighted degree day anomalies. But if your first event is a really big, strong one with lots of much belows or strong belows, then it'll get closer to the typical weighted degree day versus BCF of gas or megawatt of power demand. So there's a lot of wiggle room in the fundamental relationships for this target period, this first third of October.
Is there even more wiggle room because of COVID? Just that more people are home? Is that adding sort of a compounding?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. That the COVID impacts definitely were issues to deal with in trading. Through the course of the summer, the daytime demand was like the morning through the midday demand segments were weaker overall, and you saw that persist through September. But then into October, you started to have some school districts open back up, and you saw a associated increase in daytime demand. And then relative to prior months during the COVID stuff, when people would come home, you'd see more of an uptick in that evening peak demand surge. So it didn't necessarily affect the total peak levels, but it affected more of the shape of the curve, the load curve over the intraday period. And that ended up having some interesting effects on power dispatch and some gas burn.
That's good. Let's see, we could also take a quick look at just the cooling season to date. It's always, since we've talked a little bit about the EC and CFS, there's the ECMW. We have 21 forecasts. We forecast once a week since May. There's the EC, and there's the CFS is near the bottom there. You could see the CFS bias this summer, so it's still it's almost minus 10 CDDs. EC almost no bias, but not exactly great performance too. I like looking at the directional hit rate. Well, at least I think that's interesting. So the directional hit rate on the EC is relative to the 30-year normal. I'm not talking the 10-year, just the 30-year. Is about 2 out of 3, 67%. The CFS, it's like it almost tries to be wrong. I mean, 38% relative to the 30-year normal.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, maybe. Hey, I'm curious actually, since we're, Jason, you're probably now starting to look at the GEFS extended. They just released this a few weeks ago or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had enough of a kind of window yet to kind of evaluate it and kind of compare to see how it's doing versus, like the CFS at those lead windows, 15 to 30 days out or whatever?
I don't think we have enough to make much of a call yet. It's been pretty similar to the CFS, and has tried to be cooler than the Euro climate model, weeks 3, 4, or 5 at times. But we don't know. I don't think we have enough of a track record yet. Even though it's tried to be cooler at times versus the ECMWF climate model, it's actually tried to be warmer than the ECMWF leading into this current late October period.
Right.
So that's going to be probably a pretty poor verification for the extended GFS right now ensemble.
Okay. All right. So
and the upgraded version of the GFS ensemble, daily out to day 16, it's just proven to be a shinier, more newfangled 10 more member pile of junk relative to the previous version. It still has a penchant to put big troughs in the east when they may not need to be there, or over deepen them and be too strong with surface cold.
Okay.
That seems to be the early read on it.
It's good to know.
It's going to be a long winter if that's the case, and heading into a strong La Nina background state. If you don't get a lot of blocking, then you're going to see a lot of belly aching about the cold mongering GFS family again.
And unless anyone has any other thoughts on the attribution, maybe that's a good segue, talking about La Nina and things like that, into our into today's kind of forecast. And I think this is a good point, Jason, and if you want to share anything, like share the screen or anything, just let me know. But I think it's a great point to turn it over to you. And again, you can maybe give us a little bit of your background, and then kind of get into your forecast. And again, I think today it's kind of a casual Friday. So if you want to poke around, you just brought up La Nina. If you want to poke around a little bit in terms of some of the topics and things you're looking at for the season ahead, and not just this particular 16 to 20 day window, go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'll share some screen stuff if you let loose of it.
Stop share. Should be able to share it.
All right, there we go. I will start with just a couple of interesting comments about the verification period that you just talked about, because I think that's a kind of a break in what had been, an overall more cool cool variability skewed pattern. And I think there's been a lot of connection to higher frequency, faster moving eastward propagating modes of convective variability in the tropics that have been driving a lot of this, along with sometimes subtle and then other times not subtle at all relationships to enhanced amplitude in the wave train caused by recurving tropical cyclones, both in the Western Pacific and the Western Atlantic basins. And this current period that you just talked about, the 7th through the 11th, happened to be the lull in the Central Pacific negative VP party that had been taking place since really got turned on back in September. There had been a couple of beefier eastward propagating modes, either Kelvin wave or fast MJO, and then we had this lull right during this 7 to 11 target period, and the response was pretty interesting in some of the key teleconnections. So right when we had that response, you had the EPO go positive, and essentially you lost any significant connection to polar air and lost some amplitude in the pattern. And when you do that with warm SST anomalies all around North America, anywhere you're going to draw from a source trajectory that's not named Alberta or Saskatchewan or Manitoba, you're going to be, stoutly warmer than normal. And I think that's what you saw. So as far as attribution goes for me, for this period, the 7th to the 11th, I think it's positive EPO tied back to a break in Central Pacific convective forcing that allowed the Pacific North American wave train to essentially de-amplify. And there's your warmth for that period. So for the next forecast period, actually, do you want me to do just a quick background again, introduction? You said
yeah, if you don't mind, I think that'd be great. Yeah.
So I've been on here a few times. I know those were recorded, but just for the quick reminder to see where some of us sitting in these energy trading support seats where we come from. I've been doing commodities trade support since 2002, and prior to that, I was a very, very happy government employee back in Oklahoma at the Storm Prediction Center, and that's really my roots. I'm a Sooner undergrad and grad, and started working at the National Cirrus Storms Laboratory my freshman year, and basically worked all the way through grad school and after, and then moved over from NSSL to SPC for a year, a little over a year, and was loving life. Was kind of on the track to be a WCM or a SU at a Plains NWS forecast office, and I loved that idea, and I really thought I was done. And then one of my buddies at SPC, Paul Janish, which other industry folks will know, we worked together at SPC. He got a call from a college buddy back at A&M that was down here in Houston for some help from a meteorologist with demand forecasting for energy trading. And Paul went down for the interview to talk over, see what the opportunity looked like. And he called me at the first break in the interview and said, "Jason, you have to go find one of these energy jobs immediately now. Drop what you're doing, go to the internet job searches and find one of these energy places looking for a meteorologist, because it's us against the GFS, and they pay a hell of a lot better than the government." So I did that. I went and found a listing. It was Duke Energy. Went to interview to see what it was all about, and really liked it, and they really liked me, and the rest became history. I left what I thought was my dream job path to do this stuff, and I'd say 18 years in, it's been a blast, and I really enjoy this challenge. Every single day is a new problem. Every single day is a new challenge. There's really no end to it. The markets are now global, and they're looking for any and all excuses to take a position in a high frequency and low frequency perspective. So there's as much opportunity as you're willing to work to go catch here. That's good and bad. It means there's very little time to relax and get away from it, but it means that your time engaged with it is potentially highly rewarding, but also pretty risky. So as far as the meteorology involved, that I think would interest folks in the early stages of their career or pre-career stages, still slogging through the degree program, either undergrad or grad. There's if you do it right, there's a hell of a lot more science involved than just being a model jockey. You have to teach yourself a lot of the concepts. You have to read a lot more of the applied forecasts and applied meteorology papers and studies. The ability to forecast in a scientifically defensible manner, I think, goes well beyond the base curriculum that I know a lot of us, at least quote unquote old timers, guys 10 plus years or 15 plus years in the business. The curriculums, I'm sure, have changed and are changing with the cooperative interaction like Dave and his group have been a part of, trying to get real world practical applications in front of students. I think it's an excellent thing to do. It's a very worthy cause, because energy and agriculture, I think, have been the best sectors with which to monetize expert meteorological guidance, but there will be others. I don't know what they are, but there will be others. Weather's the most omnipresent factor of our lives as humans on the planet, other than our health. But in terms of external interaction and external forcing on what our lives look like, we can't control the weather, and it's really beneficial to know what the weather's going to do in terms of business impacts and societal impacts, and do I get to go to my kid's soccer game in a couple days? Well, touches a lot of aspects. So to do this right, you need to be able to do more than just interpret models or regurgitate model information, and that's where forming good relationships with research and development folks that are not necessarily doing forecasting for their everyday jobs is a very beneficial exercise. That's one thing that I took on early on in my energy career. I forged a pretty close relationship with a couple of subseasonal dynamics researchers that were within different parts of the National Weather Service. And out of that came a lot of stuff that's now become more mainstream. So people now talk more about convective forcing and the global atmospheric angular momentum budget and its terms. It's where the GWO came from with Klaus Weichmann and Ed Berry, and these concepts are now a hell of a lot more mainstream than they were 10 to 12 years ago, and I think they have improved the subseasonal forecast abilities. So I think that's all come from the private sector. I mean, the Weather Service had really no interest in what those guys were doing, to the Weather Service's detriment. And I think collectively we showed that there's some really good work being done that doesn't involve pouring money down the CFS black hole. And it's work that can challenge ECMWF's dominance in the world of quantitative weather forecasting beyond day 2. So I'll get off my soapbox a little bit there, but I think it's interesting. If I was a grad student or upper division undergrad, I'd like to hear somebody tell me, straight shoot me and tell me a little bit of what the real world's like. So yeah, now my current role, I've been around a bit in the industry in 18 years. I've been on really big floors that traded a whole lot of natural gas and crude oil and electricity. I've been on some really small floors that traded mostly just electricity, and then pretty much everything in between. And this current role is it's a pretty interesting company. Their specialty over the last 10 years has been actually a day ahead nodal power trading. So for those of you that aren't super exposed and familiar with the electricity grid, several of the electricity subgrids around the US are divided up into individual paths between nodes or points within the grid. And these points correspond to key power generation stations or power substations or power line interchanges that help describe in great detail how power flows around the grid. So you can trade congestion, you can trade the difference in demand across the grid and the difference in supply across the grid. So weather can affect both of those aspects. This company's been very successful in the day-ahead nodal trading market, and they wanted to diversify. So they went out and talked to some of us who've been in more forward-looking parts of the market and trading electricity out more than just day 2 or out into the weeklies and the front month, the next month total contract of electricity delivery, along with natural gas and crude oil and potentially some weather sensitive agriculture. Basically things that you can use fundamental analytics on supply and demand to gain a trading advantage in. And I've been here since January and really enjoy the situation. So looking forward to being here for a while. And that should let me participate in worthwhile endeavors like this one, trying to improve medium range and subseasonal forecasting overall. I think it's a worthwhile effort. Interestingly enough, within the energy and agricultural space, there's a definite hunger and desire to have better weather forecasts from day 10 through day 30. Of course, anybody wants the most accurate forecast you can give them, however far out you can get it. But the market dynamics within the energy and agricultural commodity markets, the most frequently and heavily traded portion of the forward contract curve is basically the next 45 days. So if you can improve the 15 to 35 or 40-day forecast, you're right in the sweet spot of where the market wants to take the most action. So you can really increase the bang for the buck for that research dollar that you put into that part of the forecast curve. And I think the good news is that from a science-based perspective, this is the part of the forecast curve where we actually have a snowball's chance in hell of meaningfully improving skill. Seasonal forecasting, I think, is very much at the craps table absent a massive, strong INSO signal or some other like ungodly, overwhelming external force, but mostly INSO. The subseasonal space has a whole lot of other moving parts. And to the extent that we can identify the physical processes involved in the current pattern evolution, you can extract some predictability from the extrapolation of those physical processes down the road a few weeks into the future. And that's basically been the foundation of the GSDM framework, the Global Synoptic Dynamic Model from Dr. Weichmann and Ed Berry. I've been a pretty staunch disciple of that forecast methodology, but I think I've pushed it to its bleeding edge limits in trying to take what has basically been a diagnostic framework to do a lot of attribution about why we're at where we're at, and to really push it hard to see where we can eke out predictability, skillful predictability out into this, week 3-4 time frame. Career-wise, I think it's been a success. Is there a smoking gun? Is it a cookbook recipe that you can follow and nail week 3 and 4 every time? Hell no. It's we're dealing with a horrifically noisy, non-linear, messy system. It's not deterministic. The answer at week 3 is not known. We're not out there fumbling around, like a blind squirrel finding a nut every now and then, to the predetermined outcome. The path is changing, and so the beauty of the GSDM framework is you can follow a process. It doesn't mean it's going to give you the right answer every time. The process is determine the physical processes that are important for now, and given the information you have in your hands right at this moment, you can make a solid, scientifically defensible prediction about some key physically reasonable scenarios that are possible, and put some probabilities around their outcome out to weeks 3 and 4. And then you do it again tomorrow, the same thing. And if you have good traders, then they can take advantage of the scenarios and the probabilities that you give them, the risk. They can put on the right kind of risk. And if you have really good traders, really good critical decision makers, they won't kick you in the face for changing the entire story on them tomorrow because some key piece of information changed. That's the key to finding true happiness in this role. Find people that understand the problem. Everybody wants the best weather forecast, but very few understand that there are times when the best weather forecast is I don't know, or I can't tell you, or it is not, I cannot determine that at this point. So, that's there aren't a whole lot of risk takers that understand that. So good luck finding people to use the information right. Okay, forecast information for the target period. So this being Friday, this is normally done on a Tuesday, right? And I saw that the forecast period was the 28th to the 1st.
That's right. That's right. We keep the forecast deadline on Tuesdays, although we sometimes move the discussions around during the course of the week. Yep.
Yep. Okay. So that lets me cheat just a little bit since it's a few more days down the road. But I think there's still some interesting things to talk about without cheating too much. So if we're targeting the 28th through the 1st, that's actually now getting into the bulk of the 11 to 15. And so we have more medium range model information to look at. But I'll also I'll give you a tease as to what I think beyond that period as well, into what the current 1620 is, which would be the 1st through the 5th, something like that, essentially after the start of the month. So if we take a quick look at, I like starting back where I showed you. I need to move this thing. I'll go back to where I started. I like starting with tropical convective forcing. Notice I say tropical convective forcing and not just MJO. And notice I don't put up just an RMM plot and read off the phase and go with that phase composite. That's not how convective forcing is supposed to be used in the forecast process. I like the idea of trying to forecast the evolution of convective forcing and what that will do to the global atmospheric angular momentum budget, namely what that will do to AAM base anomaly and the tendency, and how the change in AAM tendency and transport, meridional transport across, especially the Pacific sector, will affect the configuration of the Pacific North American wave train. That's really what we're after. When you're trying to forecast the North American pattern, especially through late summer and early fall and the first half of winter, the Pacific, the Pacific pattern is super key anyway, all the time, but it can override anything that the Atlantic was to do, barring a massive, super strong negative NAO. An NAO or AO by itself really cannot force a pattern change over the North American continent, especially during the first half of winter. It certainly can modulate the intensity and amplitude of the pattern response over the U.S., but very, very rarely will you have an Atlantic set of pattern features dictate what the North American pattern will look like at a week 2, week 3, potentially early week 4 time frame at this time of year. So we have various global models, 200 millibar velocity potential anomaly plots here. Everybody likes to think the Euro is the best model in the world, and the various performance metrics do support that statement. The anomaly correlation coefficients for 500 millibar heights and for 2 meter temps and for 850 temps are typically almost always higher for the ECMWF. But there has been an upgrade, and I put upgrade in quotes, over the last year or so from the ECMWF platform. And in one of the descriptive statements that came out from ECMWF describing some impacts of the upgrade, there was an admission of sacrificing performance of precipitation, temperature, and wind metrics in the tropics in order to trade off and increase performance metrics in the short-term forecast in the mid-latitudes. And I kind of like with mainstream media, not only looking at one side of the political story, nobody really freaked out about that in the forecast community. I was very much bothered by this statement and this course of action, because I was worried that detrimental impacts in the tropics would have painful ramifications down the road in the medium range, and I think we've seen some of that over the last several months, and a lot of that shows up in the velocity potential anomaly Hufmullers. So one thing I want to draw your attention to, I'm sure there have been Hufmullers shown by other folks, but time longitude plots of VP anomalies, time increases going down. We're looking at this band 15 north to 15 south around the equator, and the plots to the top side of these lines are observations. The bottom lines are those model forecasts. So we've had a period of increased eastward propagating mode, and mostly of fast nature. Kelvin waves are fast MJOs since roughly early to mid-September. These came in concert with recurving Pacific and Atlantic tropical cyclones, and the combination of each of these events in crossing the Central Pacific was timed pretty favorably to sort of multiplicatively add amplitude the wave train across the North Pacific into North America, and give us periods of more of a positive P&A flavor, and every now and then driving the EPO negative. You can see periods of negative EPO back here. Getting going from after this prolonged period of positive EPO following the lack of Central Pacific forcing in August into early September. You light up the Central Pacific and you add in some amplitude enhancing recurving tropical cyclones, and you get some fun stuff like these EPO dips to bring us cool pushes east of the Rockies and increase the variability of the pattern. So we're essentially seeing impacts now in the next week and early 11 to 15 timeframe of additional Central Pacific action, along with the most recent recurving West Pacific tropical cyclone was Chan Hom. But it's interesting. Chan Hom was not a full jet stream integration and assimilation event. It was a recurve that helped impart some additional amplitude to the Pacific pattern, but it did not fully undergo extratropical transition and merge with the Pacific polar jet. And that has really screwed up the near-term forecast. If you've been following along, if you had been following along, this week was a very volatile week in the natural gas market. We came out of last weekend with models all going colder for both the 6 to 10 and 11 to 15. And then through each day this week, the Euro ensemble basically hacked away cold in the eastern and midwestern part of the US next week. And the GFS got drug along. And I think that was part and parcel of the Chan Hom incomplete extratropical transition process. So it got things going, but it didn't finish the job all the way, and that allowed a temporary westward shift of the mean trough. So we're going to have nice cold outbreak through the middle part of the nation here through the weekend and to start the next week. Then there will be a big warm recovery in the east, and then in the 11 to 15, which is the interesting part now, leading into the end of October, which starts to get into the target forecast period that is covered by this exercise here, where it will push the mean trough out of the west and central U.S. back into the eastern half of the country and try to be colder than normal from the plains into the Midwest. This is a roundabout way to come back and say the Euro is not the end-all be-all of all models. The Euro was basically removing any negative VP from the Central Pacific on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday forecasts. And as it warmed up next week, it also kept warmth going through the 11 to 15. So if this was Tuesday and we were looking at the Euro ensemble, the suggestions from that 11 to 15 on the Euro ensemble that were being published would have suggested a warmer risk, a warmer path to the forecast for this October 28th to November 1st. And it had to do with the Euro essentially not seeing any follow-up Kelvin wave events coming across the Central Pacific. You can see that the GFS ensemble has a lot of blue here in the Central Pacific. So does the Canadian ensemble. Anecdotally, over the last 3 to 4 months, because we don't have a lot of track record to use with the new GFS ensemble either, I'd say it's a toss-up as to which model is performing better with the tropical convective forcing evolution and its connection between the tropical latitudes and the mid-latitudes. This used to be the Euro's sandbox alone. It was the king of that court. And now there are currently no kings in this model court. There's just a bunch of jesters and perhaps an inebriated janitor to come along and clean up the mess. occasionally. So what we have currently from a forecast perspective, the strongest low frequency convective forcing signal is clearly here in the Eastern Hemisphere. And it's slowly migrating east towards the maritime continent. This is pretty typical of strengthening La Nina background states. We see this in the spatial, the global spatial VP forecast from a lot of the climate models as well. So here's the CFS VP forecasts, and here green is the upper level divergence that you would associate with focused low frequency convective activity. So I think you'd want to skew the late October into the start of November forecast probably to the colder side. I came up with like a 68 or 69 gas weighted HDD total. The 10-year and 30-year are around 65, 66. I have a plus or minus 1 sigma. I thought about trying to get fancy with the skew, but it's it's hard enough doing a 16 to 20. Hell, it's hard enough doing 11 to 15 right now in an October forecast with this many moving parts. But I think keeping a plus or minus 1 sigma makes sense now. But what I will kind of extend the forecast view with here is the thought that this maritime continent low frequency convection probably becomes more dominant with time, and I think we see a period of less Central Pacific eastward propagating mode influence, and I believe we will lose this negative EPO lean. Let's go through the 0Z cycle so you can see. I believe we will lose this negative EPO lean, and the models, the global models, are already starting to pick up on this notion that the repetitive nature of the Gulf of Alaska, Northwest Canadian ridging, that general regime that we're in right now is likely to abate. And I think we're probably going to see more neutral to positive EPO type structure in the North and Northeast Pacific and Western, Northwestern North America after the first 1 to 2 or 3 days of November. So I guess what would be 21 to 25 forecast from Tuesday, and now my current 16 to 20 going forward into the first full week of November would be warm leaning. And I would potentially go, a half sigma to maybe 3/4 sigma under the 10 and 30-year normals, which are fairly close at that point. I talked a lot about soapbox stuff, and I spent a lot of time on convective forcing and the connection to the EPO. I figured I'll close by showing just a few of the items that I include in a morning report to my critical decision makers. And so you can see I don't shy away from putting some dynamical information in their face. Do they look at it frequently? No, not really. So you put the main points that you need to drive in their thick skulls right at the front, and you bottom line it with, this is either going to be good for market sentiment or bad for market sentiment, bullish or bearish. Then they really like to hear some of the nuts and bolts reasons why, and they like to see graphics that back up some of the nuts and bolts reasons. Plus, it's a one-stop shop to act as a reference source to go back to and quickly say, well, Jason, why are you going warm? Oh, okay. I can bring them to the 200 millibar VP and say, you see all this blue here and some of this blue here in the middle part of the image. If you roll this forward, there won't be as much blue. And then, oh, okay, that makes sense. And you can show historical composites that line up with your expectations for these developments. The lack of blue in the central part of the Pacific and the return of dominance of maritime continent convective forcing, I think makes sense to have AAM go back negative as you go into early November. That should give us positively tilted pattern features in the Pacific North American wave train. And when you go positively tilted with those features at this time of year, with these background situations, you essentially cut off your connection to polar air transport east of the Rockies. If you don't have polar air connection east of the Rockies, and you've got westerlies and a deep layer of the flow coming across the Rockies, that's a warm pattern. Show some teleconnection, the big teleconnection projections, kind of the standard guys. I believe the EPO is the most dynamically relevant and connected teleconnection projection to talk about, especially going into the cold season. So I'm a big EPO proponent. NAO-AO projections are nice modulators of the amplitude potential of the pattern anomalies over the North American continent throughout the cold season. But I believe they're not influential enough to drive a pattern change in the first half of the season. Middle to latter thirds of the season, I'll be more likely to allow a big change in the NAO projection to have more of a direct effect on the U.S. pattern, but we're not there yet. We have to cover a little bit of Europe. As I mentioned earlier on my soapbox, the energy markets and the agricultural commodities markets are global. We are a substantial exporter of natural gas over to Europe and to East Asia. So European demand evolution actually can have price effects into our futures markets. So I have to keep them at least at a high level abridged of the main pattern stories for Europe. And in this current situation, we have had a little bit of negative NAO influence here through the last 7 to 10 days. It lasts through the 1 to 5 day period. And population weighted HDDs in Europe have responded as one would expect with a negative NAO to be colder than normal in a meaningful way. But I think this is also an interesting development going forward with the upstream pattern potentially losing some amplitude, and the loss of the positive A and background state that has been supported by the Central Pacific negative VP modes. As that goes away, you can also lose the eddy tilts that feed North Atlantic blocking. So North Atlantic ridging could go away, and indeed the NAO is shown to go more towards normal. And you can see European population weighted HDDs lose their colder than normal skew as you go forward after early next week. And then precipitation can be important, mostly for ag, but clouds and precipitation are also very important modulators on daytime power demand and gas burn for power generation, along with if you have a cloudy, cold day, that's actually more of a heating demand set of conditions than a cold, sunny day. So, show forecasts of precipitation in the future. And then when I look at ensemble information, I like using a hell of a lot more than just ensemble mean and spread. I'm a big fan of spatial clustering. So I show a fair amount of 6 to 10 day, 11 to 15 day spatial clusters based on 500 millibar heights, and then the 2 meter temperature anomaly clusters over North America. I think this does a real nice job of highlighting the either potentially favored route or and also highlighting some physically reasonable alternative scenarios. There are several times where one of those physically reasonable alternative scenarios are actually my favored internal view because of the poor model performance with some of these complex conditions. And lastly, I like to show the analogs from model forecast patterns back. I like to back my way into 2-meter temperature forecasts off of those patterns. In this business, you learn to have a healthy distrust for boundary layer parameterization schemes. The ECMWF has had a really bad snow cover bias issue in the cold season, for instance. Wherever there's snow cover, it will over radiate and go physically unreasonably cold in those conditions. In the summer, it's had a pretty nasty dry soil and moist soil anomaly bias. Over wet soils, it would be far too cool, but then raise dew points too much and have overnight minimums be too high. Over dry soils, it would go crazy with 2-meter temp high temperatures. So I like to get models out of the boundary layer and into a situation where they're set up for better success. Models tend to forecast 250 millibar stream function anomalies and 500 millibar heights better than they do 2-meter temps. So I like to use ensemble means and ensemble clustered 500 millibar height patterns, and then use those 500 millibar height patterns as the matching base for analogs to go back and reconstruct a 2-meter temp anomaly. So I've had a lot of success with this method, improving forecasts, even all the way back into the 6 to 10. So I found that to be a very worthwhile exercise. And finally, on a daily basis, I'll show them roll forward views into the 16 to 20 and 16 to 30. So we have an idea of where the subseasonal forecast is going on a daily basis. And at some point in 2021, ECMWF is going to start issuing the climate weeklies every day, not just twice a week. And so I want my guys thinking about their path trades that extend well beyond the 1115 on a daily basis before we get to that ECMWF higher publication frequency. You can bet the market will use that information to make more trades on a daily basis. So I want them used to that. 308, I think I'll stop there, Dave. I've got to go cover the 12Z Euro ensemble for the guys as it is. So.
Yeah, no, this is a lot to chew on. This is great. Before Jason has to run, any parting quick questions or comments? We may have to follow up on them, but does anyone have anything? There's a lot to digest there. Go ahead, Sean.
I love every time you come on and give discussions. It's incredibly intimate and descriptive. I have to rewatch them because there's so much in there. I just really appreciate it. I just want to let you know.
Cool, thanks. Pop open a Guinness while you rewatch. It helps.
Deal.
Well, yeah, and I know you have to run, Jason, but yeah, we definitely have to have you back here. Well, I hope we can have you back here maybe in the next couple months, because I would love, I had a few questions too, but I know you got to run. I'd love to dive in a little bit more into La Nina. I'd love to talk a little bit more about how you use clustering. And I think maybe next time too, we'll go through your forecast process again, because I think it's real helpful for everyone on the line, and kind of again see how you kind of splice it together, because there's a lot there, right? And for folks who are doing this or haven't done as much as you, it's probably a little bit overwhelming. But it's great to see how the sausage is made and how how things kind of come together. So thank you for sharing all of that with us here this afternoon. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I love this forum, and I'll be happy to come back. I don't mean to be a bit of a one-trick pony, but when you're a GSDM disciple, the tropics, it's not just the tropics. The AAM budget has internal dynamics that we could look at mountain torque and frictional torque as well. So it's not just convective forcing, but man, there's a ton of valuable information in a freaking 200 millibar VP hub molar.
Yeah.
The frictional torques and mountain torque signals are there as well. And people can talk about teleconnection this and model that, and all that stuff really doesn't matter nearly as much as the external forcing or the forcing feedback connection loop that you have between the tropics and the mid latitudes. And the best way to interrogate that information is to look at the 200 VP hub molars. They tell you so much because they give you all of that observed information, and they lead you right into the model forecast. It's basically keeping models honest from a physical perspective, not just how have they done in the last 2 weeks. Well, it doesn't really matter how they've done in the last 2 weeks. So this is the important thing, the physical evolution.
Yep. All right. Well, let's all have a Guinness, and then hopefully again we can do this all again soon. So thanks again,
Amen.
Jason, and thanks for everyone for participating.
Cool, guys. I'll follow up with you next week, Dave, because I want to hear some of what y'all have been playing with in terms of potential toys into this winter.
Sounds good. We'll do.
All right. Later.
All right. Bye, everyone.